She is a narrated fiction story created for discussion and entertainment purposes.
Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a rugged mechanic inherits a desert home off the grid, he expects peace, not war with a power-hungry HOA. But when drones, forged documents, and midnight trespassers come knocking, one man fights back with tools, tenacity, and a whole lot of legal firepower. 15 years ago, I inherited a dusty, sun-faded house on the outskirts of the Arizona desert from my Uncle Ray, former Air Force pilot, lifelong bachelor, and general pain in the ass. He left behind a rickety house on 1.5 acres, a pile of yellowing aviation manuals, and a hangar full of tools that probably predated the Cold War. Most people would have sold the place. I didn't. I fell in love with its stubbornness. This house didn't belong to any HOA, didn't answer to any board, and didn't give a damn about aesthetic continuity or approved fencing styles. It was just mine, and I liked it that way. The years rolled by, and I turned the old house into a home. New roof, solar panels, a decent garden, and a garage outfitted like an aircraft mechanic's dream. I work remote, fixing and customizing parts for private planes. No boss breathing down my neck, just me, my tools, and the occasional FedEx drop-off with a turbine blade or landing gear sensor. Peaceful, self-sufficient, quiet. That's what this place gave me, until recently. See, when I first moved here, the land around mine was still mostly cactus and dust, but over time, developers moved in like termites. Houses sprouted up faster than weeds. Cookie-cutter homes with taupe siding and driveways identical enough to give you vertigo. They called the place Silver Trails Preserve, like slapping a fancy name on it would distract from the fact that it looked like a suburban printer jam. At first, I didn't care. Their HOA had nothing to do with me. I wasn't inside their boundaries, and I had all the paperwork to prove it. County records, plat maps, even a dusty old letter from the zoning office that flat out stated, parcel excluded from future community association governance. But that didn't stop them from acting like they owned the whole damn zip code. The first real sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning, right after I finished tuning a throttle assembly in the garage. I stepped out for coffee and noticed a shiny new metal sign planted just outside my driveway. Private road, access for HOA members only. Problem was, the road wasn't private. It was a county-maintained access path. Always had been. But now, apparently, I was trespassing on my own entrance. I figured it was just some HOA overreach. I snapped a photo of the sign, emailed it to the county, and moved on. But then the mail arrived. A fat envelope from Silver Trails Preserve Homeowners Association. I opened it expecting some flyer or welcome nonsense. Instead, it was a formal notice demanding I register as a community resident and begin monthly payments of $420, retroactive to the start of the fiscal year. There was even a breakdown of anticipated fines if I failed to comply. Weed height violation $50, unapproved exterior paint $100, unauthorized trailer, my workshop $250. At first, I laughed out loud. They clearly had no clue I wasn't one of theirs. But then I noticed the letter was signed personally by Mary Bateman, the newly elected HOA president. I'd seen her once before at a gas station down the road, wearing a visor and yelling at the teenage cashier for not bagging her gluten-free crackers correctly. The type of person who uses phrases like, "We have bylaws in normal conversation." Now she'd set her sights on me. I sent them a reply the same day with scanned copies of my deed, zoning documents, and a firm but polite note stating I was not a member, had never been a member, and would not be paying anything to anyone. I figured that would be the end of it. It wasn't, not even close. 3 days after I mailed off my official response to the HOA, I came home to find someone had added a second sign under the private road notice, this one in red block letters, unregistered resident, HOA action pending. It was bolted to the same post, angled so that it faced directly at my property like some kind of passive-aggressive wanted poster. I stood there for a good 30 seconds, just staring at it, half expecting to hear the Twilight Zone theme music kick in. I yanked it down, tossed it in the back of my truck, and fired off a not-so-polite email to the HOA's generic inbox, attaching photos, a quote from the county's road maintenance ordinance, and a short legal reminder that posting threatening signage on non-HOA property was, in fact, criminal harassment. I didn't bother including pleasantries. If they wanted to escalate, I could escalate. The next day, a drone appeared. I noticed it hovering about 15 feet above my yard as I was walking back from the mailbox. At first, I figured it was some bored kid from the neighborhood, but this drone was no toy. It was high-end, stabilized, and trained on my property like it was filming a military recon op. I waved at it. It didn't move. I went inside, grabbed my wrench, came back out and lobbed it like a baseball. Missed by a mile, but it finally zipped off in the direction of the HOA subdivision. That night, I scrolled through my security camera footage and found 2 separate flyovers from the drone earlier in the day. It had been circling before I ever noticed it. I archived everything and backed it up to cloud storage. If this turned into something uglier, and I was starting to think it might, I'd need every scrap of proof. Then came the letter. Not an envelope this time. An official-looking white trifold slipped into my mailbox, bearing the HOA logo and a giant bold header. Final notice, unauthorized occupancy. It read like a legal eviction. The language was threatening but vague, full of buzzwords like non-compliant structure, community encroachment, and revocation of privileges. It accused me of unregistered residential use and stated that the HOA was within its rights to pursue administrative remedy, including law enforcement involvement. My favorite part? Failure to respond may result in civil or criminal liability. Criminal for living in my own damn house. I'll admit that one got under my skin. I called their office line, got an answering machine, and left a concise message. This is Grayson Crow. My property is not, has never been, and will never be under the jurisdiction of your HOA. Your letters are harassment. Your drone is surveillance. Your signs are illegal. Back off, or I'll file a formal complaint with the sheriff's department and the zoning board. You're playing a dangerous game. I didn't hear back, but I didn't need to. The message had clearly been received. That weekend, 2 HOA board members I'd never met before showed up at the edge of my driveway. Matching polos, clipboards in hand, one of them holding a tiny little measuring wheel, like he was preparing to survey the Oregon Trail. They didn't cross onto my property, smart, but they stood right at the boundary line, scribbling notes and pointing at various features of my yard. I walked out calmly, phone in hand, already recording. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" One of them blinked like he hadn't expected me to actually be home. "We're just here performing a routine visual assessment under HOA authority. You have no authority here. This is private property. We were informed your residence is within the revised community boundaries." "Wrong again," I said. "Now, unless you'd like to explain your intentions to the sheriff, I suggest you leave." They left. Not in a hurry, but they left. That night, I got a call. Unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Mr. Crow," came the voice, sharp, clipped, unmistakably smug. "This is Mary Bateman. I understand you've received some of our communications. I'd like to remind you that resisting integration into the Silver Trails Preserve community is not only unneighborly, it's unlawful. You'll find that compliance is inevitable. Sooner is better." I didn't reply. I just hung up. But in that moment, something shifted. This wasn't about HOA dues or neighborhood unity. This was war. It started with the crunch of tires on gravel. I was mid-sip on my second cup of coffee, standing barefoot on the porch, when I heard the distinct sound of a vehicle pulling up the driveway. Not a delivery truck. Not my buddy Ben. This was deliberate. Heavy. A white county sheriff's SUV rolled to a stop just outside the gate. 2 officers stepped out. One, older, stocky, moved like he'd seen some shit. The other was younger, fresh-faced, probably still thought writing parking tickets was community service. Both had that look cops get when they're not quite sure whether they're showing up to a noise complaint or a hostage situation. I set my mug down and walked out to meet them, hands visible. The older one gave me a polite nod. "Morning, sir. You Grayson Crow?" "I am. Something wrong?" He glanced at his partner, then back at me. "We received a report of suspected squatting at this address. Claimed the individual on the premises may be unlawfully occupying a residential structure belonging to the local HOA. My brain did a full double take. I stared for a second, genuinely unsure if this was a prank. "You're telling me someone called the cops and said I am squatting in my own house?" The younger one shifted awkwardly. "Yes, sir. The complaint was filed by a representative of the Silver Trails Preserve Homeowners Association. They stated you've refused to comply with occupancy verification procedures and that the home is considered under HOA jurisdiction." I laughed. I didn't mean to, but I couldn't help it. The absurdity finally crossed into full-blown satire. "Gentlemen," I said, gesturing toward the porch, "I've lived here for 15 years. I inherited this property from my uncle. I pay my property taxes, my utilities, my insurance. I've got county zoning records, a deed with my name on it, and a notarized exclusion letter from the original plat filing. You want paperwork? I'll bury you in it." The older cop held up a hand. "Easy. We're not here to arrest anyone, just checking the validity of the report." "Got ID?" I handed him my license and invited them up onto the porch. I pulled out the thick folder I'd been keeping ever since Mary Bateman started flexing her clipboard muscles. I laid out everything: property deed, parcel map, the letter from the zoning office, utility bills going back 5 years. The older cop scanned through them slowly, nodding. "Yeah, looks solid to me." The younger one added, "You mind if we take a few photos for the report?" "Be my guest." "Want a photo of me flipping off the HOA sign too?" They didn't laugh, but I caught the older guy's smirk just slightly. We wrapped things up in about 20 minutes. As they walked back to the SUV, I asked, "So, what happens now?" The older one turned. "We'll file the report and mark it as resolved. But since there's now a formal complaint on record, it'll probably get passed along to the county's civil division. Paper trail, you know." "Fantastic," I muttered. Before leaving, the younger officer hesitated. "You might want to install more cameras, and maybe don't answer the door without knowing who's knocking." "Already ahead of you." They left, and the quiet came back. But it wasn't the good kind. It was the kind that comes right before the storm. I walked the perimeter that night, checking every inch of fencing, every motion light, every camera angle. I upgraded the firmware on my security system and added a cloud backup just in case the HOA tried getting cute. Because I knew Mary Bateman wouldn't back down, not after dragging the cops into it. No, this was just her first move. And somewhere, probably in a meeting room with too much beige and not enough soul, she was already planning her second. The lawsuit came by certified mail, stuffed in a thick envelope with embossed letterhead and a lawyer's name that sounded like it belonged on a country club scoreboard. Bennett and Ryerson, LLP. The return address was one town over, but the stench of HOA smugness radiated straight through the packaging. Inside, a formal civil complaint filed against yours truly by the Silver Trails Preserve Homeowners Association. I scanned the pages with growing disbelief and rising blood pressure. Apparently, I was being sued for refusal to comply with community standards, evasion of member responsibilities, and my personal favorite, unauthorized residential occupancy on HOA-governed land. They claimed my home fell within the natural expansion boundaries of the HOA as codified by revised parametric guidelines, and that I was benefiting from HOA resources and infrastructure without remitting payment. Translation: they redrew some imaginary lines, slapped their flag on my land, like Columbus, and now they wanted my money or my house. The gall. I called my lawyer, Jess Carter, immediately. She was a pit bull in heels with the patience of a rattlesnake and a resume that included suing the city zoning board into submission 3 years ago. I barely got the words Silver Trails out of my mouth before she sighed and said, "Tell me they didn't just file a claim based on an HOA perimeter redraw." They did. Oh, good. I was due for a new punching bag. We met the next morning at her office. She skimmed the complaint, sipped her coffee, and smirked like she'd been handed a birthday present. "They're bluffing. There's not a judge in Arizona dumb enough to buy this. But we're not just playing defense. We're going on offense. You ready to hit back?" I nodded, ready to bury them. The countersuit went out by end of day. Harassment, obstruction of access, defamation, and attempted civil fraud. Jess was thorough. She included every letter, every photo of their signs, every drone screenshot. We demanded HOA cease all further contact and pay damages for legal costs and loss of use due to their obstruction. Speaking of which, 2 days later I found a freshly installed metal gate blocking the only access road to my house. Not just a decorative gate either. Full steel with a keypad and a sign reading, "Private Road, HOA Vehicles Only." I stood in disbelief for a solid minute, blinking in the sun like I was having a heat stroke hallucination. They'd actually done it. They'd locked me out of my own property. I wasn't unprepared. I parked off to the side, hiked the half-mile around the back of my property, and climbed the slope behind my fence. Took me nearly an hour, but I made it back in. Covered in dust, mad enough to punch drywall. First thing I did, called Jess. "Take pictures," she said. We're amending the complaint. Second thing I did, hook up a battery-powered trail camera pointed straight at that gate. That same evening, a neighborhood-wide email went out from the HOA. Someone sent me a copy anonymously. Apparently, I had a few silent supporters watching the circus unfold. The message called me a non-compliant occupant who was posing a risk to community safety and claimed the gate installation was necessary to preserve the integrity of the neighborhood. I posted the email in full on a public legal forum with a simple caption, "Guess who's getting sued again?" Next day, I tried to confront the gate installer, some poor subcontractor just doing his job. When I showed him my deed and pointed to the fact that the road was clearly listed as public access, he shrugged and said he was just following the HOA work order. I took his name and license plate anyway. Jess would want them. And just when I thought it couldn't get more ridiculous, someone, probably Mary herself, had started distributing flyers around the subdivision. They featured an actual photo of my house with the words, "This property is under investigation. Unauthorized resident. Please report suspicious activity." My neighbors, many of whom I hadn't spoken to in years, started giving me sideways looks. I was officially the villain in the HOA's suburban morality play. But I wasn't about to let them write the ending. Not by a long shot. The envelope from the HOA's lawyers arrived on a Thursday. Inside was their key evidence for the upcoming court hearing, a printed map titled Silver Trails Preserve Expanded Boundary, Amendment 3A, complete with a highlighted area that, no surprise, now conveniently included my entire property. Pinned to the corner of the map was a supposed acknowledgement form bearing a barely legible signature next to the words Resident Consent, Raymond Crow, 2009. My uncle's name, my dead uncle's name. I stared at that signature long and hard, flipping back through old documents in my filing cabinet. I'd seen Ray's signature 100 times, on his will, the house deed, old flight logbooks. This one. It was about as accurate as a drunk left-handed fourth grader tracing it from memory. Wrong angle, weird loops, and it was conveniently dated just 6 months before he died, when he was already bedridden and barely able to hold a spoon. I scanned it, compared it to the documents I had, and nearly laughed. This wasn't a mistake. It was fraud. An actual felony-level slap-the-handcuffs-on kind of fraud. I called Jess and sent her everything. She called me back 10 minutes later, already in shark mode. "This is beautiful," she said, voice practically humming with energy. "We've got them. This is textbook forgery. Did you check with the recorder's office?" I hadn't yet, but I drove there the same day. The clerk, a sleepy older guy named Alan who wore bifocals and smelled faintly of printer toner, pulled up the records. As expected, there was no filing, no record, no plat amendment with my parcel included. In fact, the last formal zoning map from the county had my property clearly marked as excluded from any community or association overlay. I requested a certified copy of the plat, and Alan even stamped the corner himself, shaking his head. You'd be amazed how often these HOA types think they can outsmart land records. They forget government paperwork's like a cockroach. It survives everything. The next day, Jess filed a motion demanding that the HOA produce the original signed consent form. She also submitted a fraud complaint to the county DA's office, complete with signature analysis and a side-by-side comparison of Ray's real signature and the forged one. But we weren't done. I started digging deeper. If they were bold enough to forge a document, who knows what else they'd faked. I paid a private land surveyor, guy named Dean, who showed up in cargo shorts and boots caked with half the county's topsoil, to resurvey my lot, property lines, access points, and utilities. 3 days later, Dean emailed me a 30-page report confirming the obvious. My land had its own zoning designation, private access, no recorded easements, and no legal inclusion in any HOA structure, past or present. He even included drone photos and a GIS layered map. It looked like something out of a courtroom crime drama. Jess nearly squealed when I handed it to her. As if that wasn't enough, I got a call from an unexpected source. Doug Stanford, a retired city planner who used to work at the zoning office back when Uncle Ray lived here. He'd seen my name pop up in some public court filings and decided to reach out. "I remember that parcel," he said. "Raised hell during the expansion plans in '09. Your uncle practically chased our staff off with a wrench when we brought up joining an HOA. Sounds about right." He filed an exclusion request with the planning board that year, and it was approved. Full exemption. He even had a letter of recognition signed by the board chair. Should be in the archive. I'll see if I can find it." He did. And when I got a scan of it 2 days later, I had to just sit down and take it all in. My uncle had officially filed a letter rejecting HOA inclusion, and it was acknowledged and stamped by the board months before the forged consent form was supposedly signed. We had them cornered: forgery, fabricated boundaries, false legal claims. But the best part? The HOA didn't know we had this yet. Let them walk into court thinking they held the winning hand. I couldn't wait to watch their faces when we flipped the table. It was just past midnight when my motion lights blinked on. Normally, I wouldn't think much of it. The desert is full of things that scurry, hop, or slither in the dark. But this time, I was already awake, working on a repair schematic for a custom landing gear, and the light timing was off. It stayed on too long, way too long for a rabbit or a breeze. I muted the music, pulled up the camera feed, and there they were. 2 figures ducking low near my southern fence line. One tall, one shorter. Both dressed in dark clothes, the shorter one with a bulky bag slung over her shoulder. I zoomed in, enhanced the night vision view, and just stared. Mary Bateman and her lapdog, the clipboard carrier I'd seen lurking at the gate installation. They were inside my fence line, on my property, at night, with a backpack full of God knows what. I hit record and let the camera do its job. They moved along the back hedgerow like amateurs. Mary held what looked like a small camera, one of those motion-activated wildlife types you can strap to a tree. They stopped near the garage, whispered something, and then mounted the damn thing on my cottonwood tree using zip ties. So that's what this was. Surveillance again. Except this time they weren't hiding behind drones or fake letters. They were physically trespassing on private property after dark to plant an unauthorized camera, without a warrant, without a clue, and without any sense of how badly they were screwing themselves. I didn't interrupt, didn't yell, didn't even turn on the porch lights. I wanted them to finish. I wanted the footage to be clean, uninterrupted, and legally unshakable. They were gone in under 5 minutes. I watched them leave the same way they came, back through a cut in the HOA fencing that clearly wasn't official, probably their little nighttime shortcut for clandestine HOA mischief. As soon as their silhouettes disappeared into the dark, I stepped outside, walked down to the tree, and carefully removed the camera. It was a cheap one. No GPS, no lock, just a micro SD card tucked inside. I pocketed it, went back inside, and dumped the entire feed onto a backup drive. Sure enough, it had been recording. I had footage of Mary setting it up, close-up shots of her face, her voice, her assistant calling her Ms. Bateman. You couldn't ask for a better confession if it came notarized. The next morning, I walked into the sheriff's office with a flash drive in hand. Deputy Reynolds, the older cop who'd responded the first time, looked up from his desk and sighed when he saw me. "Please tell me you're not here to report drone attack squirrels." I smiled grimly. Worse, illegal surveillance and criminal trespassing. His expression sobered when I explained. I showed him the footage, the stills, and the SD card. He called in a colleague, and I repeated the story. By the end of it, both men were stone-faced. "This is a Class 1 misdemeanor minimum," Reynolds muttered. "If she accessed your property with intent to surveil, that bumps it." And the assistant. Same charges unless he turns on her. I signed the incident report, handed over the drive and card, and filed an official complaint. By afternoon, I had confirmation. A formal investigation had been opened, and both Mary Bateman and her little intern were being subpoenaed for questioning. Their actions were not just unethical, they were criminal. Back home, I installed 2 more trail cameras with overlapping views and infrared. I wasn't playing defense anymore. I was documenting a crime scene. And, just for fun, I printed out a screenshot of Mary mid-trespass, laminated it, and stapled it to the tree where she'd tried to hide her spy cam. Underneath it, I wrote in big red letters, "Private property. Trespassers will be recorded, reported, and publicly humiliated. Let's see how long it takes her to walk by and notice." I walked into the courthouse that morning dressed like I was heading to a business meeting, not because I cared what the HOA thought of me, but because I wanted the judge to see exactly who they were trying to paint as a rogue squatter. Pressed shirt, clean jeans, boots polished. My lawyer Jess showed up 10 minutes later in a black blazer sharp enough to draw blood and an expression that said she'd already buried 3 HOAs before breakfast. Courtroom 4B was half full. On one side sat Mary Bateman, radiating smugness in a pastel power suit, like she thought this was a PTA fundraiser. Her assistant, clipboard guy, sat beside her, looking like he was trying to shrink into the upholstery. Behind them was Bennett, the HOA's attorney, tapping notes on a tablet with the confidence of a man who clearly hadn't reviewed the bomb Jess was about to drop in his lap. "Let's begin," the judge said. Bennett stood first. His argument was as predictable as it was arrogant. He claimed my home fell within Silver Trails Preserve's revised governance perimeter and cited the map they had submitted with the so-called signed consent form from my late uncle. Jess didn't interrupt. She just watched, arms folded, letting him dig the hole. Then it was our turn. Jess rose, adjusted her collar like she was clocking in for work, and calmly said, "Your Honor, the document the plaintiff submitted is fraudulent." The room went dead silent. She walked the court through the evidence like she was giving a TED Talk. First, she introduced the original zoning plat, certified, time-stamped, and showing my property outside HOA boundaries. Second, she presented a side-by-side comparison of my uncle's signature on his will versus the scrawl on the so-called consent form. It wasn't even close. Third, she submitted the letter from the county zoning board, written in 2009 and signed by their chairman, confirming that my uncle had formally rejected HOA inclusion, a document pulled from the county archive and bearing the official seal. Mary's smile cracked for the first time. Then Jess moved to the surveillance camera incident. She handed the judge stills from the video. One showed Mary on my property at night, mounting a device to my tree. Another showed her assistant handing her the gear. She explained the setup, the motion lighting, the camera timestamps, and how the feed had been turned over to the sheriff's office. The judge leaned forward. "Let me get this straight," he said slowly. "The president of the HOA broke onto the defendant's property at night to plant an unauthorized surveillance camera after submitting a forged document claiming that same property belongs to them?" "Yes, Your Honor," Jess said, as calmly as if she were reciting the weather. "We have filed both a criminal complaint for trespass and a civil countersuit for harassment, defamation, and attempted fraudulent annexation." Bennett tried to object, something about misinterpretation of administrative boundaries, but the judge shut him down hard. "You'd better be prepared to explain why your client submitted a document with a dead man's forged signature," the judge snapped. Mary's face was frozen now, the pastel mask gone rigid. Her assistant was visibly sweating, his eyes bouncing between us like a cornered animal waiting to bolt. Jess leaned into the final blow. "And one more thing, Your Honor. We have a sworn statement from a retired city planner, Mr. Doug Stanford, who personally handled the zoning exemptions on that parcel. He's prepared to testify that the HOA's map is fictitious and was never approved by the Planning Commission." The judge looked over the file, silent for a long moment. Then he closed it slowly, like it physically pained him to touch this much idiocy. "This case," he said, "has crossed the line from civil nuisance into criminal misconduct. Court is adjourned pending further review. Ms. Bateman, Mr. Bennett, you are both advised to retain criminal counsel." I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just turned slightly, caught Mary's eye, and gave her the same polite nod she'd given me when she first told me compliance is inevitable. Turns out, so is karma, especially when it's backed by a hard drive and a very pissed-off mechanic. I was back in courtroom 4B a week later. This time, it wasn't just a hearing. It was a reckoning. Word had spread like wildfire after the last session. Half the neighborhood must have taken off work to watch the fallout. Every bench was filled. A local reporter from Channel 5 News even showed up with a notepad and a look of barely contained bloodlust. Jess sat beside me, flipping through a folder like she was reviewing lunch options, while I sipped stale courthouse coffee and tried not to look too smug. Across the aisle, Mary Bateman had lost her pastel armor and now wore muted gray, like she'd dressed for a funeral, possibly her own. Her lawyer, Bennett, was present but pale, clearly regretting every decision that led him to this courtroom. The clipboard assistant was nowhere in sight, probably lawyered up or fled to Idaho. The judge entered, and within minutes, it was clear we weren't here for roundtable discussion. He didn't waste time. "I have reviewed the evidence submitted by the defendant's counsel, including verified documents from the county zoning office, forensic signature analysis, sworn witness statements, and photographic and video proof of unlawful surveillance. I've also reviewed the criminal complaint filed against the plaintiff." He paused. The room was dead silent. Even the reporter had stopped scribbling. This court finds that not only is the defendant's property unquestionably outside of HOA jurisdiction, but the plaintiff's actions constitute willful misrepresentation, harassment, and attempted fraud. Furthermore, the submission of forged documents and physical trespassing constitutes criminal misconduct. Then came the words I didn't think I'd ever hear in real time. Bailiff, take Ms. Bateman into custody. You could feel the oxygen leave the room. Mary's eyes went wide. Your Honor, this is a misunderstanding. I was protecting our community. He wouldn't follow the rules. The judge didn't flinch. You submitted forged documents to this court, unlawfully entered a private residence, and attempted to exert control over land you had no legal claim to. That's not community leadership. That's criminal behavior. The bailiff was already behind her, handcuffs out. Mary twisted, sputtering some kind of protest, but her lawyer just sat there like a statue. No one stood up to defend her. No one cried injustice. Hell, no one even looked surprised. She was cuffed and escorted out the side door like every other person who thinks they're untouchable, until they aren't. And it wasn't over. The judge turned back to the room. Effective immediately, this court issues an injunction against Silver Trails Preserve HOA from making any claims, demands, or enforcements upon Mr. Crow's property. Furthermore, the HOA is ordered to pay $220,000 in damages to Mr. Crow for legal expenses, emotional distress, obstruction of access, reputational harm, and repair costs related to unauthorized surveillance and physical gate obstruction. Someone in the audience gasped. Jess didn't even blink. She was already writing down the order. And finally, the judge added, this court recommends the County Zoning Commission suspend Silver Trails Preserve HOA's operational authority for a period of no less than 12 months pending a full audit. The gavel came down like a gunshot. Court adjourned. Outside, the sun felt brighter than usual. As Jess and I stepped into the courtyard, the reporter from Channel 5 caught up with us. Mr. Crow, do you have a comment on today's decision? I glanced back at the courthouse doors where Mary had just been escorted away in handcuffs. Yeah, I said. Don't mess with people who read the fine print. We walked off before they could ask another question. I had no interest in being a media darling. I just wanted to get home, rip that gate out of the ground, and breathe freely for the first time in weeks. But damn if it didn't feel good watching the queen of HOA hell get perp walked in front of half the town. The gate was gone by the end of the week. County workers rolled in early Thursday morning with bolt cutters, a flatbed truck, and the kind of no-nonsense efficiency reserved for tearing down the monuments of bad decisions. I watched from my porch, sipping fresh coffee as they dismantled the monument to HOA overreach piece by piece. One of them waved up at me when they were done. I gave him a nod and 2 thumbs up. He laughed and drove off with the gate rattling in the back like scrap metal on its way to redemption. The road was open again, not just physically, but in every sense. Neighbors who'd avoided eye contact for weeks now slowed their cars as they passed, offering uncertain waves or sheepish smiles. One woman, Maria, I think, actually walked up to my driveway with a Tupperware full of lemon bars and said, I never agreed with what they were doing. I just didn't know how to stop it. Thanks, I said, taking the container. They'll go great with petty vengeance. We both laughed, and something about that small exchange felt like a crack in the wall. Word travels fast in small communities, and with Mary Bateman now trading HOA power trips for a prison jumpsuit, the entire neighborhood had gone quiet, peaceful, almost uncertain, like kids after a substitute teacher walks in. Then came the letter from the county. Official seal, crisp language, no nonsense. The HOA's authority was suspended indefinitely. In its place, the county had assigned a temporary municipal administrator to oversee basic functions: trash pickup, road maintenance, emergency services access. No more fines for the color of your shutters. No more forms to plant tomatoes in the backyard. A week later, a public meeting was held at the local rec center. I went, not because I wanted a say in HOA reforms, but because I wanted to make sure no new tyrant slithered up to replace the last one. It was a strange thing, walking into a room full of people who used to avoid me like I was a stray coyote, but something had shifted. They nodded. Some shook my hand. One guy even clapped me on the back and said, "You're the reason we still have fences." The temporary administrator, a former city planner named Clarissa Dunn, laid out the roadmap. A full audit of the HOA's finances, a review of all citations issued in the last 5 years, and a voluntary vote within 6 months on whether to permanently dissolve or restructure the HOA with actual accountability. Someone asked me if I'd consider running for the new board. I told them I'd rather stick my head in a jet intake. but I offered to help anyone looking to understand their property rights. Half the room signed up on the spot. Back home, I installed a new metal plaque on my fence. Nothing fancy, just bold black letters on brushed steel, 15 years on this land. I built it, I fixed it, I fought for it. You didn't let me in, you don't get to kick me out. It felt good. Not spiteful, just true. The neighborhood had changed, not just the paperwork, not just the signs, but the people too. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like mine again. Not because I won in court, but because I stood my ground, and everyone saw it. About a month after the dust settled, I got a knock on my front door just before noon. It wasn't a cop, a neighbor, or some clipboard-wielding zealot from the HOA. It was a young guy in jeans and a collared shirt holding a camera bag and a laminated press badge. "Grayson Crow," he asked. "I'm with the Arizona Sentinel. Mind if I ask a few questions?" I considered slamming the door. Old habits die hard, but something in me said screw it. I nodded and invited him to the porch. He sat where Mary's little spy cam used to hang and pulled out a recorder like he was about to interview a war hero. He'd read about the case through court filings and heard rumors of a rogue HOA takedown. Apparently, word had spread beyond the county. I gave him the short version, facts, not drama. But when I finished, he just stared at me for a beat and said, "You're kind of a local legend now." "Great," I muttered. "Do I get a statue or just more weird stares at the grocery store?" He laughed. "Neither. But your case is being cited in 2 ongoing disputes already. Turns out people needed a blueprint for how to fight back." That part stuck with me. I hadn't gone to war with the HOA to make a statement. I wasn't trying to become some flag-waving symbol of homeowner resistance. I just wanted to be left alone, to live in my house, fix planes, drink coffee without checking for drones. But if my headache of a year helped someone else stand their ground, then maybe all the stress, the legal bills, and the sleepless nights were worth it. After the reporter left, I walked the perimeter of the property. Not because I was paranoid anymore, but because I could. No cameras, no signs, no gate, just space. Mine. At the edge of the gravel road where the HOA's fake boundary sign used to stand, I noticed a new one had gone up, this time placed by the county. White metal, official lettering. Silver Trails Preserve, under external oversight. Surveillance operated by municipal authority. No unauthorized enforcement by private associations. Below it, someone, probably one of the new kids on the block, had taped up a second homemade sign in bright orange marker. "We're being watched, but not by us." I couldn't help but smile. The truth was, I didn't need to win awards or interviews or pats on the back. I had my dogs, my tools, my land, my sky overhead, quiet and wide. The world beyond my property line could keep spinning however it liked. But on this patch of earth, with its dented hangar, cracked driveway, and stubborn old cottonwood tree, I was home. And no one, not a clipboard, not a drone, not even a judge, was ever going to tell me otherwise.